and then we're available to take questions at the end, which I'll answer if they're easy, and my colleague Jane will answer if they are hard. So starting point for us was noting the shift in policy direction, much more towards, not so much away from victims, but much more focused on perpetrators as a government and policing priority, and the police being charged by the government to identify and control what were termed the most dangerous repeat perpetrators in order to proactively reduce their offending. Not very easy, in actual fact, to determine how many domestic abuse perpetrators there are in England and Wales. We do have an accurate measure of the number of incidents, calls, reports and offences, but in terms of perpetrators, a little bit more impressionistic. We've relied on Amanda Robinson's figure of 400,000. That's slightly old now. I think Amanda's here, so she can correct me if I've got that wrong or if there's an update. But even if a quarter of those perpetrators were the people who committed multiple offences, more serious offenders, as has been calculated recently, talk about 100,000 people that the police are responsible for reducing the offending of and managing. So a significant, almost unprecedented call on resources and police priorities, which interested us to see how they were going to go about that. Hampered a little bit, I think, by competing definitions of who the most serious perpetrators are. So I think we're all very used to the concept of repeat offenders as a standard measure for people considered to offer the most harm to victims. Defined by Safe Lives in 2018 as people who committed acts of domestic abuse against the same victim. And College of Policing came up in 2022 with serial domestic abuse perpetrators, so people who offended against one or more victim. I think in actual fact they noted very sensibly that these groups were not distinct, significantly overlapping. People who offended more than once against one victim likely to have relationships that broke down and moved on to other people. So in actual fact there's not that much difference between those two groups. So we have tended to look at high harm, high frequency offenders, a term coined by Peter Nehrude much earlier, to look at domestic abuse. These are the offenders who are characterised through the recency, frequency, gravity victim matrix used by the police to create demand management lists, so people who move up and down lists as they commit frequent offences or more serious offences, creating what's sometimes called top 10 or top 20 lists in individual forces. So our definition was to look at police orientated definitions and dynamic ones. It wasn't a set group, it is people who do move up and down. And we were interested in people who found themselves at the top of that list, top 10 people we took. Now, this tended to exclude catastrophic offenders. So there are other groups of perpetrators, some who have very slight involvement with police, very few incidents reported or attended to, who then move to catastrophic violence, fatal or near miss fatal. We weren't able to look at those immediately, but we're hoping to do so in the future. Of course, the police are charged with finding effective strategies to both address reoffending in the high harm, high frequency group, and also to prevent domestic homicide. So mustn't forget that as a police priority. But for us, with this project, within the confines of limited funding and a small amount of time, our aims were to investigate how the police themselves identified high harm, high frequency offenders, to determine the bureaucratic routes into police management systems for controlling their behaviour. We have written that up in our report. I'm not intending to go into that in detail today because I don't have time, but that is in the final report. To identify current strategies to address reoffending that are being used by the police today and ones which are proposed for the future, and to analyse the impact of those strategies using longitudinal data. So our forces who participated in this, we had a lot of help, coordination and collaboration from Merseyside Police, from Cheshire Constabulary and from Cumbria, so 3 out of the N8 forces. And we also, as a sounding board and a comparison, had our friends in the south, Sussex, Essex, Suffolk and Norfolk, who provided some context for us so that we could provide some comparison. First thing we did was to review the policy documentation regarding the management of offenders, and we carried out a large range of interviews. The quantifiable data came from one force. It was demand management data, so it's everybody who was on their serial domestic abusers perpetrators list, SDAP list or top 20 list from one northern force. And for each of those offenders in that group, we took every incident as recorded on the police data system niche, every incident where they were a suspect, a aggrieved person, complainant, witness, and for as far back as those records existed. So we wanted to see everything that was bureaucratically recorded for those people. That data was anonymised at source, delivered by a secure server, and we have abided by all of the ethics and information sharing agreements in place. And you can see a list of what data is contained for each incident that's recorded on niche. Thinking of current strategies that we are interested in, the first is of course bureaucratic, in that those people through the matrix do end up on demand management lists, or if they are or sometimes can end up on risk management lists or threat to life lists. But we're talking about people who end up on the serial domestic abuse perpetrators list and then are managed through the system. Some people will end up on perpetrator programs, either directed by the police or directed by the courts and run by third sector organisations or by the probation service, and those are about changing behaviour for people who are engaged with third sector organisations and are willing to change their behaviour. Various safeguarding mechanisms such as multi-agency partnerships, MARAC, which are focused towards safeguarding the victims and children of victims, and MATAC, which are aimed more directly at managing the needs of the offenders themselves. Disruption, incapacitation, what some people would tend to consider to be a normal police activity, that is fast response to incidents, positive action being taken where it's appropriate to do so, and management for people who are not willing to engage. So I'll put this up on the screen. I'll give you a little bit of a rest from my voice and you can just read that yourself. It comes from one of our interviews. I'm also not sure I can convey the appropriate sense of a menace that was delivered with. So just give me 1 second to look at that. So this is really about clamping down on people who are not engaging, who are reoffending and trying to disrupt their criminality. And we also looked at things which are in place for some forces at the moment, but which are being proposed more and more by forces, which was lawfully audacious tactics. So we can talk a little bit more about that at the end if you wish to, but these are the kind of tactics which are currently in place for organised crime groups that are now directed against people who are considered to offer the most serious and persistent risk to victims. A small number of people has to be sanctioned by senior level management. And not forgetting court-imposed controls as well, that we wanted to see the impact of, obviously not controlled by the police, but influenced sometimes by police practices, conditional bail, suspended sentences imposed by the court, and ultimately custodial sentences. So we're looking for evidence of all of those things in the niche data, in the quantifiable data. And that allowed us to produce, I've diagrammatically produced these here so you can kind of get a sense of the data we were looking at. It gave us longitudinal data, life stories for everything that was bureaucratically recorded against particular people. So across the bottom of your screen there, I think your screen may be bigger than ours. Ours is just a little box, so it's straining our eyes here a little bit, but across the bottom, it is the year and the month. Each of those little blue notches is incident or bout of offending, and there's a little description of what that includes. So for this person here, they're an AP right at the beginning in 2017 with some neighbourhood nuisance, then start their domestic abuse history, and that's recorded in red. All DA is recorded in red, all non-DA is recorded in blue, with the harassment of an ex-partner, and a recent breakup, harassment of neighbourhood disputes taking place, more harassment of the partner as the relationship deteriorated, beginning of a significant drug taking and driving offences, buying drugs from pubs in the local area that's been noted on there, more drugs and drive offences, thefts, so on, moving through to prolonged harassment in 2019 through to for the whole year 2019. That's as the ex-partner formed a new relationship. Then huge amount of neighbourhood disturbances, criminal damages and so on, until he forms a new relationship, where this time same-sex relationship, and there begins harassment of the new male partner. Thereafter, there's quite a prolonged period of time of just chaotic lifestyle offending, drugs, drink, alcohol and so on. And then from 2021, his record gets significantly worse when it comes to domestic abuse, harassment of a new male partner, assault of a female friend, rape of a female friend, rape of the male partner, all alleged and never resulting in charge or conviction. And just one more example, another person here, female offender, again victimised at the beginning of her bureaucratic record, neglect of her 7-year-old daughter, some kind of breakdown, and then it goes through into incarceration or locked into a mental health ward, where there's a whole series of assaults on staff through the system.
That's from a long time.
Pardon?
Someone who's not muted.
Oh, okay, sorry, someone asked me a question there. Problem on a page created through MARAC into prison, mental health warrants, and so on. So we made those longitudinal lists for everybody. So what did the data as a whole tell us? Average of 21 incidents per person in our top 10 per year, one person racking up nearly 1 incident per week, and with very long antecedent histories stretching back over more than 10 years for most of those offenders. 6 of the offences or incidents they were involved in involved property offending, half of violent, not surprisingly. 3/4 of cases they were suspects, and in a quarter of cases they were aggrieved persons, usually just where an incident resulted in both people making a complaint. Quite surprisingly, the vast majority of offences were not DA related, and none of our sample appeared to be the calculating, target orientated specialists in DA that perhaps government policy is aimed against. Instead, we found that most of their lives were fairly chaotic, punctuated by neighbourhood disputes and disturbances. They're involved in drug-related offending and usual associated disputes with buying, selling of drugs, and significant evidence of poor mental health. It was very hard for us to identify which strategy was in place at any one time. So the police data was insufficient. It didn't record what strategies such as bail, suspended sentence and so on automatically. So that made it very difficult for us to try and evaluate, and overlapping strategies, as you can see from the life grids I had on before. People are subject to many overlapping strategies. Very difficult to evaluate which of those for these individuals is actually working. Not surprisingly, there was no involvement in perpetrator programs. It's only 1% of offenders will actually experience a perpetrator program. You could say that our people were in those SDAP lists because they had not had perpetrator program, therefore continued their offending. I suspect that their opportunities for going on those programs were actually very, very low. There's also low mental health intervention it may have been happening because of data sharing protocols across police, NHS, mental health services and so on. It is difficult to discern whether they were receiving any kind of help or assistance for their mental health. It just wouldn't be recorded on the police systems. High charge rate compared to non-SDAP offenders, and the problem on a page or plan on a page, the trigger plans did seem to increase the likelihood of arrest and charge, but impressionistically the rate is still relatively low. We would have expected more charges to result from the incidents that police attended. Victim engagement, support for prosecutions, very, very low indeed. That's also not surprising. What was perhaps more surprising to us was issues with court sanction. So issues with bail and remand decisions and the failure to activate suspended sentences was baffling to us, in fact, given the scale of offending and the amount of incidents of people involved in whilst on suspended sentences to receive a second suspended sentence or to have it extended and not activated was bemusing. What issues are raised in the research? One for us that we hope to investigate in the future with colleagues at Liverpool and elsewhere. Is it possible to reconcile demand and risk management processes? So basically that's looking at demand management. These are the SDAP lists, people who are committing harm frequently, and maybe committing serious harm from time to time, but generally not the highest kind of harm, but the highest frequency. Is it possible to reconcile the management of those people with risk management? So that is the management of people who are feared to become catastrophic offenders. So people who have very slight engagement with police and then commit very serious offences. Is it possible to bring those two systems together in any meaningful way? That won't be easy. Secondly, looking at the strategies that are available to police, what we have is very small capacity for perpetrator programmes. If we were to enlarge the scope and scale of perpetrator programmes, it would be an unprecedented, significant investment that may be unlikely within the current economic and social and political climate. So you've got those people who are going on perpetrator programmes, and you've got people who are being actively supervised by the police, but there is a large number of people, a significant proportion of people who fall in between, and there doesn't appear to be successful strategizing around those people. So that's something else to think about. Increasing the charge rate with evidence-led prosecution and a presumption to charge, positive action and so on, that may be seen as desirable, but it would also be seen as overriding the wishes of victims in many cases. What would be the implications of that, both in terms of future engagement for victims and the message that it sends out by police? And how can there be coordination and greater information flow about the risk and antecedent history of people on SDAP lists, for example, with the CPS and with HMCTS, which avoid blurring the operational judicial divide? I do think that that should be something that's given very strong consideration, given the fact that the courts are continuing to bail and failing to activate suspended sentences for people who on paper, given their record, looks to us like that is the wrong decision. And what are the legal and ethical boundaries of lawfully audacious tactics? They're obviously right at the end of police powers, not often used, but maybe available to the police, and they carry risks both for the public and for the police themselves. So need to think that through. If you want to have a less garbled view over a hurried 25 minutes, Our report is available online through Liverpool University and probably the N8 as well, I would think. Our next steps, this has been a very useful thinking process for us to go through the N8. Couldn't really have got to the stage we're at without the N8 funding, so grateful for that. But to look at an ESRC application, which has just gone in with Liverpool, Essex, Manchester and MMU, with the support of 8 police forces, a DA Commissioner, Joint Partnership and the College of Policing. And also, I'm very interested to see what's going to happen with the N8 funded research that Antoinette Huber is running on digitally enabled coercive control, because I think that that's going to be another fascinating study which will help us. So that's that, Helen and everyone. Thanks very much.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Yes, your report is available on the N8 website. I was just finding the link to post in the chat. Both the sort of 4-page summary report, if that's helpful to people, and the full report as well. Great, so I don't think there's been any questions in the chat. So if anyone has any comments or questions on that, let us know. Carly Lighthouse.
Hello, thanks for an interesting presentation. Really interesting to see how you've approached it, and maybe this is a question that relates to what's proposed next in the follow-up work, because it seems to me that there's some opportunities here to look not just, it's quite nice to see those little case studies of the sort of top 10 prolific offenders, but presumably there's scope and capacity to look at, you know, larger cohorts of kind of patterns of offending and linking different data sets, because the question I think that was prompted in my mind when I saw those timelines is what's happened before that first encounter with the police. You know, have they previously been known to social services? Have they dropped out of school? Have they, you know, what other systems have failed before that kind of trajectory and encounter with the police starts? I just wanted to know if that's something you'd considered, or whether that might be, you know, something, a limitation of kind of the available data.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Carly. I mean, in terms of increasing the scope, that is certainly true. So although we started by looking at One Force's top 20 list, there were in actual fact 1,200 people on the top 20, because it is a dynamic system that goes down. So certainly in terms of quantity of people, we won't be short of people to look at. In terms of that question of what happens before there's a bureaucratic record, very difficult. It may be possible to do some sampling, would probably presumably rely on some interviews with perpetrators themselves to look into some life history interviews of the sort that Dave Gadd has carried out, for example. One of the frustrations, I think, a little bit, not for us particularly, but also for the police, is a lack of joined up information sharing across partner agencies. I think relational databases which had details when GPs, medical services, hospitals had fears or concerns about the direction a person's life is taking would be interesting to have that data available to researchers. Whether it would be desirable to have it available to police, probably a mixed blessing because of the dangers of creep across data. Yeah, just looking, I'm trying to read the chat now.
Yeah, it's about victims who go against the orders imposed. Oh, do you want to go back to Carly there?
Yeah, is that okay, Carly?
Fine, absolutely fine. I just thought there's also some value potentially in looking at the Data First programme and the data linkage across different stages of the criminal justice system, as well as the education data that they have as well, and the looked after children in care as well. They've got some data on that, so you can kind of potentially piece together journeys through different organisations and institutions over time. So that's just something to think about, or to task a PhD student with.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. That's a great idea. I think the other thing is to look forward as well, prospectively, to see what happens, because we now have a measure of people's offending history up to this point. We're now in a position, using the same data, actually to go forward another 2 years to see the continuation of the story. It really relies on us having very accurate information, not just about the strategies that's in place from the police, though, but also the criminal justice sanctions that have been applied, because quite often there are gaps in police data where it appears that there's been a cessation of offending, and it's because people have been in custody. So we really need all that data to come in from the criminal justice end as well.
Sorry, if we can go to Valerie for her question, and then sorry, trying to see your name, and then Deborah. But Valerie, if you want to ask your question first.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was interesting. I'm Valerie Wise, National Domestic Abuse Lead at Victim Support. And in Cumbria, we do run a programme for high-risk perpetrators. I just wondered, you didn't give a gender breakdown of the people that you looked at. So I just wondered how many of those were males and how many were females. Thank you.
8 men, 2 women.
Thank you.
So, yes. I mean, I'm very keen on the dedicated programmes that are run by police. There's a very interesting one run by Sussex as well for complex DA, Valerie, and I'm aware of the one in Cumbria as well. It would be good if more people could be put through that. Obviously, lots of the people that we're looking at are not engaged, and it would be better for them if they were engaged and they'd have better routes through the system. Also, I think it's has to be reiterative as well. I think just a one-off opportunity to go on these programmes isn't sufficient. We need to keep trying and trying and trying, because people's lives do change. So thank you very much for your question. Thank you very much for your work in Cumbria.
Sorry, I keep in my half. Thank you. Valerie, Kimberly Steen's just asked for your email contact. Just highlight that to you. And Deborah, if you'd like to ask your question now.
Hi, yes, I was just thinking in terms of obviously the practical side of policing. We often come across situations where even when we put in an active civil order, the victim, makes contact with the perpetrator first and they invite them round. And was that captured in your longitudinal data? And has that been assessed at all in terms of how else we can sort of circumvent those situations? I mean, obviously we're talking about people here and their intimate relationships, so obviously they're complex and dynamic, but we do find, obviously, in terms of the prosecution side, it severely undermines anything because the victim has made that initial outreach to the perpetrator.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. As you say, people have complex lives and complex needs. There probably is picked up in some of the niche commentary, but wouldn't be routinely put in. It's the same problem as is faced by the courts with conditional bail, for example, with DA cases. Perpetrators told not to contact will be breached for their bail, come to court and say, well, the victim phoned me or contacted me, and they're told the same thing in court, as I presume you tell perpetrators that it is their responsibility not to engage in any contact. So I don't see, practically wise, I don't see anything different that can be done about that. It is simply their responsibility. They're under the order.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense, or did you disagree?
Yeah, I was just wondering if it was, I mean, I think you did answer it, if it was in your longitudinal data in that timeline, whether it would be relevant or not in terms of which of those events were victim instigated, or does it not make any difference? Because obviously those were opportunities where the outcome may have been different. I don't know. It was just a thought that came into my head.
Well, it's a very good and interesting thought, and it's the problem also with positive action, isn't it? That I think probably when legislation is enacted around that, people or parliamentarians imagine that there would be ideal victims and ideal perpetrators, and that the difference between the two would be very easy to see. And as you all know, if you attend with response officers or neighbourhood to an incident, it's often a lot more messy than that. Often involves substance abuse of some kind or other, and it's not always clear where fault lies. And police are charged to usually make an arrest in those circumstances. So I think it's the same with people who are not abiding by civil orders, that fault may not always be one-sided, but nevertheless law, and I think police action also always has to suppose that it does.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. If we can have Patricia Cope now, and then it will be Amanda Robinson, and then Viv in the chat, and then Valeria.
Hi, I'm Tricia. I'm from Wigan GMP Police, and we've started introducing MATAC, which I've seen on your previous slide, which is working really well for our high-risk perpetrators. But it was going back to your earlier point of keep offering that support, keep offering. We've had people stay on our cohort and just keep them on and just keep offering, and then eventually, after so much time, they have sort of turned around to us and said, yeah, we'll sort of engage with the support. So it's just that keep that offer, really keep going, along with the enforcement that we've seen really work for us. And we've developed a sort of risk assessment tool so we can really score our high risk and identify what it is that's making them high. So we've used like a scoring mechanism, which has worked really well at the moment for us.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And people's circumstances change, and people mature, and mental health improves, or whatever. Lots of life changes. So I shouldn't be a simple binary decision. You had a chance, and that's the end of it. Yeah, absolutely agree with you.
And it's some good results. Thank you.
That's interesting about the risk assessment as well. Might be subject of another research project. Sorry, I think I've frozen there a bit, but yes, Amanda, if you could ask your question now. Amanda Robinson. There we go.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I froze. Thanks for the presentation, really interesting. I guess one of the things I've been thinking about is, once you're doing research on domestic abuse perpetrators and interventions, you kind of get a tunnel vision about the domestic abuse, but as those profiles in your research has shown, and as in many studies that look at longitudinal offending history show, there's so much about these offenders that are actually just general offending profiles. And so it's interesting to hear about the MATAC and other examples of multi-agency work that is effective. And it's effective because it is addressing those underlying criminogenic needs that are at the base of so much offending, not really specific to domestic abuse. And I think that that's an interesting implication for these programs of research as they go forward, is just to bring that general offending and those general criminogenic risk factors into the frame much more. And that's not to say that there aren't specific risks associated with domestic abuse offending. Obviously there are, but to really address it, you've got to look beyond, a perpetrator program around relationship styles and anger management and gender norms and the rest. So I think there's starting to be a lot of evidence coming in from many different directions and different kinds of data sources as well. That's kind of, I think, some of the next important kind of changes in terms of where we go. I think we'll be looking at these offenders much more comprehensively and not so much as a specific cohort, because anyone that's looking at high harm perpetrators knows that it is really messy and they've had a long criminal history, and it's not the case that they're always the perpetrator, and it's definitely the case that they have a lot of needs that are similar to other kinds of offenders and not something novel or distinctive for themselves. Anyway, thanks.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree more with all that you've just said, Amanda.
Great, that's really interesting. So if we go to Viv now, Viv Bickham, who's got a really interesting point about the perpetrator panels that have been in use at, sorry, I was just reading the message, Langshaven and Somerset.
Yeah, so it's just to say I work for the DRIVE programme. I'm a practice advisor, and DRIVE's been going now since 2016, focusing on high harm, high risk perpetrators, and again was independently evaluated from the University of Bristol. Again, you know, as has been said, they're often complex cases. We work with offenders for up to 12 months and potentially for an extension of up to 15 months, and do a combination of disrupt activity and support. Some of the cohort don't even know they're on the DRIVE programme because we're working with a disrupt actions in regards to that. One of the things that we've also identified, and I was really interested around the mental health aspect within the research, because we've just done some further research with the epidemiologist Dr. Dee Knight, and we've identified that they are 23 times more than the general population to die by suicide, particularly at the ending of relationships, etc., and things like that. And we're now working on like practice guidance in regards to looking at reducing obviously those numbers along with the national strategy. But I think what is key is that we sometimes get the aspect of that perpetrators, particularly high harm, high risk perpetrators, will use the threat of suicide as a way of coercive control. But actually, when you look at the mental health aspects and the research that we did, they were often in contact with a variety of agencies, but didn't get the mental health assistance that they needed. And again, it's thinking from that perspective that we have to do things a bit differently, particularly for those that have been in long-term aspects of criminality, etc., and things like that. But was really interested. Thanks for your presentation today. I've really found it very fascinating.
Thanks very much. I think we're finding your stats on suicide very interesting as well, and I think that's that really could be a message that's communicated to Judicial Studies Office as well, where evidence of threat of suicide is taken to be evidence of coercive control with no real threat behind it, and is an aggravating feature by judiciary. So I think that would be really important to get that message through to judges, especially. That's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. And if we can go to Valeria Scafida now.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So thank you very much. I found that really interesting. I personally spend most of my time lately looking at survey data on domestic abuse, and it's always from the point of view of the victim. And then I'm left with many question marks about what about perpetrators and why do we know so little about them and their lives. So I came here with high expectations, and I've found this really interesting. I must say I found myself feeling sorry for the perpetrators, which is not something I expected I would feel. And it makes me think about what are the causes of the causes which lead to people finding themselves in these situations. And I highly suspect this kind of perpetrator won't be randomly distributed in the population, that there will be structural factors at play. I've skimmed the report while you were speaking. I didn't see any specific mention on this. I wondered what your thoughts were on that. And if there are structural factors at play, I mean, it must be really a very invasive intervention that can reverse the lifetime of disadvantage that most likely will have contributed to perpetrators' lives looking like they do, at least on the outline. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think thank you for that, and you're absolutely right in a couple of regards that both victims and perpetrators in our study, their lives under pressure due to structural situations such as poverty, poor housing, poor education. So I think you probably would find that is a feature of many of the people who end up on SDAP lists. That isn't to say that it's not equally distributed throughout society. It means that other people may have different strategies and ways of dealing with it, which preclude police action. So that's something to think about. And the second thing is, I think, the intergenerational nature and social learning and so on. Again, Dave Gadd's work on Boys to Men kind of project shows that people are often deeply traumatized or victimized as children grow up to repeat patterns of managing their domestic life, which are problematic. So that's another thing to factor into that. So I agree. Thank you very much for that.
Brilliant. Those are really interesting ideas there, and obviously lots of scope for further work in this area. And I just wanted to bring people's attention to, I just posted in the chat, if you scroll up a bit, the 4 recommendations from the report that I summarised. Wondered if Barry and Jenny wanted to sort of address those at all, talk through them, and if any of the participants maybe wanted to respond to them in terms of how effective you think they'd be, or how accessible they are to, especially if there's to the police officers in the chat, how able you think you feel to implement those in your organisation. Gemma, if you want to. So Gemma, has got her hand
Sorry,
up.
I was on mute. In relation to West Yorkshire, we sort of have trigger plans, which sometimes are implemented for specific things. So I suppose in relation to getting those down to the officers that attend on the streets to the domestic incidents, I suppose it wouldn't necessarily be extremely difficult in relation to getting that information to the officers, but obviously it'd have to be a tailor-made trigger plan for each individual and each perpetrator, which I think probably would be quite time consuming in the initial stages of getting all those trigger plans in place, I would expect.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, would be perhaps possible to start thinking about the top 20 and having a trigger plan for, or a plan on a page for each one of those to make a start on it, because I agree it would massively benefit officers attending if they knew what the plan was. Because obviously there's a huge amount of interpretation that goes on when officers attend an incident, and having some idea of what the general plan is, or what the idea is, or whether an arrest should be made if possible, or whether other action should be taken. I think that would be a great benefit to the officers attending. It would also be a benefit to the victims and ultimately to the perpetrators as well. So, I mean, I don't know. It is hard. And I mean, police data, it isn't, we work with lots of police analysts. It's not of the quality that they would like either. But one of the things that is really missing is any kind of mention of what strategy they're under. So if it was recorded on niche that this person is subject to disrupt activities, or that this person is generally engaging with offender management or on a perpetrator program, that would be something that we could use for evaluation purposes, but also officers could use in their dealing with incidents at the time. I'm going to take silence, so you absolutely agree with what I'm saying. That's
Gemma, if you want to respond to that. Yeah, go ahead, Gemma.
Sorry. I was just talking to my colleague about the top 20 list that you were talking about. Can you just say it again? Just the last bit.
Just think, if you started with the top 20 and had a trigger plan for each of those, that might make a start. You know, that would be. I agree.
We do have we also have in Calderdale, we have like a threat harm risk list as well. So I would suppose it would probably sort of be similar people to who is put on that list, I would imagine, which is obviously something that we do all together, but actually it might be a good idea to suggest doing trigger plans for the people that are on there. I think is that the top, I think it's the top 10. We provide 5 in our district. So we do that every 3 months, I think, isn't it? Yeah, 3 months.
Perhaps we could come back to Gemma and just see how that works in West Yorkshire. Not aware of that, not a force we've worked with particularly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's just when we do the daily dram meetings, if there's people on there that are sort of high risk, you know, high intensity users, you know, people that not only possibly pose a risk to the partners but pose a risk to others as well, but normally there does tend to be sort of a domestic element, then they're discussed sort of at a more senior level, but we gather that information to put forward to them to see who it is that's causing our district the most concern and the most issues within the last 3 months.
Does that list, does that include threat to life? Is that a threat to life database is included in that as well, consideration, or is it just about frequency?
It's just there is. It's sort of a mixture of, it's a combination of them all, really. It's a mixture of frequency, but it's also a mixture of you know, the level of risk to their victim, and then that then coupled with, well, actually, is there a high level of risk, and how often is that high level of risk presenting itself to the dram? So there's a number of factors that are included in that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the complexities is that all of the demand management lists like SDAP, they're retrospective, it's what has happened, and all of the threats to life are prospective, it's what may happen. I think that Essex and TVP are doing some interesting work in the prospective area of looking at patterns which may result in catastrophic offending. So yeah, it's a tricky business. Thank you.
That's really interesting discussion, and if people want to get in touch with other attendees, or of course Barry and Jane, afterwards, my email is on the registration and available through the NAPRP website. So if you don't know someone's email and want to find it, get in touch with me, and I'll be able to email that person and ask them to contact you. Just final comment there, I think, from Charlotte. So maybe if we cover this one from Charlotte, and then it'll be about time to wrap up, which will be kept to time, which is you know, a bit of a red letter day. So Charlotte, if you want to come on and I can read it out. So Charlotte Harrison says, there should be more of a linked approach towards this level of DV perpetrator, like there is with sexual offenders. That's all right, Charlotte, just so the microphone isn't working. So like there is with sexual offenders, between probation and the police, this way risk assessments would have already been completed for the individual with the risk management plan in place. So yeah, Barry and Jane, what do you think about the scope and the need to link up with probation services particularly?
Yeah, I think probation. Well, we'd like to. I don't want to speak on Jane's behalf. I think we'd like to see all of the data joined up across probation. also CPS and HMCTS as well, really, to have a coordinated, so that everybody knows all of the information that's available. But I mean, as Gemma's pointed out, this is a lot of intensive work. It's also dynamic data which changes all the time, so you need some complex relational databases to be designed, really. Did you want to say something else? Or?
No, just that was one of the things that we thought, wasn't it? That it seemed amazing that you couldn't kind of see any link with the probation data and the courts data, that you then had to kind of get that and join it up. Even the police had to do that to kind of join it up separately, because it just seems so intrinsic to being able to understand how to deal with perpetrators.
What do you think the major obstacle is to having more collaboration between the probation service and the police in that way? Is it technological, like just being able to share the information, or is it like judicial, like needing to keep the system separate? Or?
Well, I mean, yes, your last point there, judicial, you need to keep it separate because there has to be a divide there, but it's resource, it's complexity, it's different data standards, all of those come into play. We don't have a data warehousing kind of system for criminal justice data, and it seems to be beyond the Home Office to devise one as well. Really, I mean, I would struggle to see this coming into place quickly, if at all. And therefore, I think we probably are thinking about force by force responses to this. But it's a big ask, I think, to join that data up. But it certainly would improve policy making and police practices.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't want to feel I'm speaking out of ignorance here. Would you be looking at, or is this in place already, sort of multi-agency meetings for safeguarding, like using that sort of approach to look at managing perpetrators, especially high-risk perpetrators? Would that enable more collaboration?
That may be a good thing. It's not what we looked at. So we were looking at basically what can police do to improve their responses, their response to victims and to managing. So I'm sure that would be, but it wasn't. We couldn't cover everything within the research. But hopefully we'll get some money from ESRC and we'll be able to take a deeper look at some of those issues with a group of very talented CIs on that bid as well. So I would expect a lot from it if we get it.
Nairi's just pointed out that there's MARAC, MATAC and MAPA are all multi-agency responses to safeguarding. Again, migrants. I don't know if that's like focused on protecting victims or managing perpetrators, and if there's like distinctions to be made there. But yes, I think it's as it's a minute to 2, we'll leave it there. As I said, if anyone wants to follow up on anything from the, sorry, Gemma, is that a new hand, as it were?
Yes, sorry, it was just a quick one. We actually already have over in Calderdale, we have a domestic abuse IOM department, which solely focuses on perpetrators of domestic abuse, sort of a robust approach to basically I don't know if I say this, controlling their behaviour, managing their behaviour. So we sort of have that, and we've found actually that it's worked really well, people that are on there, we have good relationships with prisons and deal with them, robustly when they leave prison, linking with probation, but also we have a couple of stages they actively manage them and sometimes they monitor others. So it's already sort of implemented over here, and it works really well.
Hopefully that's of interest to Charlotte Harrison. She's just saying that the DVIOM was removed in Merseyside, so that's interesting. Might be an interesting conversation to have, Charlotte and Gemma, after the webinar, to kind of think through like how like why it's worked in West Yorkshire and perhaps why it didn't in Merseyside, and what could be changed there. So thanks everyone ever so much for your participation. It was a really interesting webinar. Thanks very much to Barry and Jane. Just before you go, just to reiterate that we've recorded the session, so it'll be available on the NAPPL website. I will email all participants and let you know when that's available. Should be next Monday probably. And yeah, got another couple of events coming up. There's one that's sold out, which you for so the co-I on this project, Sandra Wortlake, ran another small grant on identifying the victim in coercive control cases. If I'll ask in the when I send out this recording if you'd like to be notified of that one as well, and any other kind of upcoming events at NAPRP. Particularly, we have next March, we're co-hosting an event with Durham and UCLan on preventing gender-based violence, which has the ambition to create like a 10-year vision and a manifesto for change for where we want to be in 10 years. And it'd be really great to get the collaboration between practitioners and academics and lived experience at that event. And yeah, so yeah, I don't think there's anything else. So thanks ever so much. And I hope you all have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.